The winter of 1943 had left the Eastern Front in chaos. In the south, the German Wehrmacht was still reeling from the disaster at Stalingrad. The Red Army, sensing opportunity, pushed forward relentlessly, reclaiming territory and forcing German units into hurried retreats. Yet victory in war is rarely a straight line. The Soviet advance had overextended supply routes, leaving spearheads thinly supported. In March, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein exploited this. Launching a counterstroke near Kharkov, he dealt the Soviets a sharp defeat, recapturing the city and stabilizing the front, at least on the map. Beneath that surface, Germany's position was far weaker than the restored front suggested. Stalingrad had cost the Wehrmacht hundreds of thousands of men, fuel was scarce, and tank divisions were severely depleted. Yet Adolf Hitler believed there was still a chance to seize the initiative. His eyes turned to the Kursk salient, a vast Soviet-held protrusion into German lines, nearly 150 miles deep. To the German High Command, it was the perfect target for encirclement. It was here, in the planning rooms of early spring, that Operation Citadel took shape. The strategy was direct: a northern pincer from Army Group Center under General Walter Model, and a southern thrust from Army Group South under Manstein. Meeting east of Kursk, they would crush the Soviet forces inside. Hitler believed this would restore the strategic balance in the east. And if you want more of these deep, moment-by-moment breakdowns of history's turning points, where battles are won or lost before the first shot, make sure to subscribe, like, and share so you're part of the journey through the past. But in war, timing is as deadly a weapon as any tank. The offensive, planned for early May, was delayed again and again. Hitler insisted on waiting for new weapons: the Panther medium tank, the Tiger heavy tank, and the Ferdinand tank destroyer. They promised unmatched firepower, yet their reliability was unproven, and every postponement gave the Soviets precious time. Marshal Georgy Zhukov and General Alexander Vasilevsky recognized the German intent almost instantly. The salient was transformed into a fortress. Soviet engineers built 8 defensive belts in depth, covering hundreds of miles with minefields, trenches, and artillery. More than 400,000 mines were laid. Anti-tank guns were dug in at concealed positions, while mobile armored reserves waited beyond the front lines, ready to counterattack at a moment's notice. By the last week of June 1943, the stage was set. The Germans were convinced they had crafted a decisive plan. The Soviets were equally certain they would withstand the blow, and turn it into an opportunity for their own offensive. The Battle of Kursk was no longer just an idea. It was an approaching reality. At dawn on July 5, 1943, the silence along the Kursk front shattered. German artillery batteries roared to life, unleashing thousands of shells onto Soviet positions. The Luftwaffe joined in moments later, its bombers streaking low, targeting communications hubs, artillery emplacements, and suspected troop concentrations. To the men of the Wehrmacht, this was the long-awaited beginning of Operation Citadel. Yet, even in these opening minutes, cracks were visible. The element of surprise had already been lost. For weeks, Soviet reconnaissance aircraft had tracked German troop movements. Prisoners and defectors confirmed the timing of the attack. In fact, the Red Army had launched its own massive artillery barrage mere hours before the Germans began, catching some forward units off balance. This wasn't a battlefield caught unprepared, it was one waiting, weapon in hand. In the north, General Walter Model's 9th Army pushed toward the city of Panayrai. Progress was measured in meters, not kilometers. Dense minefields slowed the advance, and every breach came under a storm of Soviet fire. The Ferdinand tank destroyers, designed to pierce enemy armor from extreme range, found themselves in a deadly environment of close-quarters combat. Without machine guns for defense, they were easy prey for Soviet infantry armed with grenades and Molotov cocktails. In the south, Field Marshal Manstein's 4th Panzer Army faced equally stubborn resistance. General Hermann Hoth's armored spearhead, including the elite 2 SS Panzer Corps, sought to break through near Belgorod. Here, the fighting was more fluid, but no less brutal. Panther tanks, making their combat debut, delivered devastating firepower, but mechanical failures claimed dozens before they reached the front. Maintenance crews worked frantically behind the lines, cannibalizing damaged vehicles to keep others operational. By July 7, the offensive had ground into a grim rhythm: morning artillery barrages, cautious armored thrusts, immediate counterattacks from dug-in Soviet formations. Soviet General Nikolai Vatutin in the south and Konstantin Rokossovsky in the north committed fresh reserves daily, preventing any German breakthrough. The Wehrmacht's plan relied on speed. Now, time was slipping away. South of Aboyen, the SS divisions Leibstandard, Das Reich, and Totenkopf clawed their way forward, forcing the Soviets into a fighting withdrawal. Villages changed hands multiple times in a single day. Fields were littered with burned-out tanks, both German and Soviet, testament to the scale of armored warfare being waged. On July 9, German intelligence reported that Soviet defenses were beginning to thin south of Prokhorovka. Manstein believed the decisive moment might be near. Orders went out to concentrate forces for a major push. Yet even as the Wehrmacht prepared to commit its armored reserves, Soviet commanders were making their own calculations. Vatutin knew that the next German thrust would come here, and he intended to meet it head-on. The largest tank clash in history was about to unfold, and both sides sensed it. Kursk was becoming more than just an operation, it was turning into a test of endurance neither could abandon. On the morning of July 12, 1943, the fields west of Prokhorovka were wrapped in a low summer haze. By 8:30 a.m., that haze was torn apart by the thunder of engines. Nearly 500 Soviet tanks and self-propelled guns of the 5th Guards Tank Army surged forward, their treads churning the earth into dust. Their orders from General Pavel Rotmistrov were simple, but brutal: close the distance, deny the enemy long-range firepower, and smash through the SS Panzer Corps before it could gain momentum. Facing them were roughly 300 German tanks and assault guns, many of them the battle-hardened Tigers and Panthers of Leibstandard, Das Reich, and Totenkopf. The ground between the two forces was narrow, bordered by the Sel River to the north and a deep anti-tank ditch to the south. There would be no flanking maneuvers here, only a head-on collision. The first waves met in a storm of steel at point-blank range. Soviet T-34s raced straight into the German line, trading accuracy for speed. The air was filled with the deafening crash of armor against armor, the crack of high-velocity rounds, and the whoosh of Molotov cocktails bursting into flames. In this maelstrom, the Tiger's vaunted 88mm gun lost its advantage. At 100 meters, even a T-34 could land a killing shot. Above, the skies were just as contested. The Luftwaffe and Soviet Air Force clashed in swirling dogfights, their fighters diving to strafe enemy armor while dodging tracer fire. Pilots could see the chaos below, columns of black smoke rising from burning tanks, crews scrambling from hatches, machine guns hammering from every ridge and hedgerow. By midday, the battlefield was an inferno. Entire companies had been reduced to smoldering wrecks. German commanders reported that the Soviets were fighting with reckless ferocity, seemingly willing to sacrifice tanks just to break through. In reality, Rotmistrov's strategy was calculated: overwhelm the Germans before they could stabilize their defense, even if it meant staggering losses. On the German side, SS tank aces like Michael Wittmann claimed multiple kills, but for every Soviet tank destroyed, another seemed to appear from the dust. The Leibstandard division managed to hold the line by maneuvering along the ridges, using the terrain to conceal their hulls and pick off advancing tanks. Yet the pressure was relentless. Every time a gap opened, fresh Soviet armor poured in. By late afternoon, neither side had achieved the breakthrough they sought. The ground south of Prokhorovka was littered with over 1,000 wrecked vehicles, tanks, half-tracks, and guns, twisted in grotesque shapes. The smell of burning fuel and scorched metal clung to the air long after the guns fell silent. Tactically, the Germans had repelled the Soviet assault. Strategically, the damage was done. The two SS Panzer Corps had been bled white, its offensive capacity crippled. For the Red Army, Prokhorovka was not just a stand, it was the moment the German drive south stalled for good. The day after Prokhorovka, the fields were eerily quiet in the way only a battlefield can be, when the wreckage of hundreds of burning tanks smolders in the summer heat. The German 2 SS Panzer Corps had survived the Soviet onslaught, but it was no longer capable of sustained offensive action. Armor losses, ammunition shortages, and exhausted crews weighed heavily. Yet the German High Command still hoped to salvage the southern pincer of Operation Citadel. On July 13, Hitler summoned Field Marshal Erich von Manstein to his Wolfslair headquarters. There, news arrived that shook the entire strategic picture: the Allies had landed in Sicily. With Italy now threatened, Hitler feared the collapse of his Mediterranean front and ordered a partial withdrawal from Kursk. Manstein argued for continuing the offensive in the south, claiming he could still deliver a decisive blow. But Hitler's attention had shifted. The opportunity for a breakthrough was slipping away. On the ground, Soviet commanders sensed the change. In the north, the Central Front pushed hard against Model's forces, gradually reclaiming ground lost in the first days of Citadel. In the south, Vatutin's Voronezh Front and Rotmistrov's battered tank armies regrouped, preparing to transition from defense to attack. Soviet intelligence, aided by partisan reports, confirmed that German reserves were being diverted westward. The time to strike was now. On July 14, Soviet artillery began hammering German positions along the Belgorod-Aboyan axis. The bombardment was relentless, breaking up counterattacks before they could form. Red Army infantry pushed forward under cover of smoke, supported by fresh tank brigades brought up from the rear. The Germans fought back fiercely, their anti-tank guns claiming a toll on advancing Soviet armor, but the momentum had shifted. By July 15, the Germans were in a fighting retreat across much of the southern sector. Soviet forces recaptured key villages and road junctions, cutting supply lines and forcing the SS Panzer divisions to fall back toward Belgorod. The Luftwaffe, which had dominated the skies in early July, now faced increasing Soviet air pressure. Yak and La, 5 fighters escorted Il-2 Sturmovik ground attack aircraft in relentless raids against retreating German columns. The psychological balance had changed too. For the first time since 1941, the Red Army had absorbed a massive German offensive without breaking, and was now pushing the Wehrmacht backward. Morale in Soviet units soared, while German troops, many of them veterans of the Eastern Front, recognized the grim reality: the days of sweeping victories were over. On July 16, the German High Command officially halted Operation Citadel. What had begun as Hitler's grand gamble to regain the initiative had ended in failure. The Kursk salient remained in Soviet hands, and the Wehrmacht had suffered irreplaceable losses in men, tanks, and aircraft. The Red Army, bloodied but unbroken, now prepared for the next phase, the Orel and Belgorod counteroffensives, that would drive the Germans further west and mark the beginning of a permanent shift in the Eastern Front. When the order came to halt Operation Citadel, German commanders understood the implication: it was no longer about seizing the initiative, it was about holding on to what they still possessed. But the Soviet High Command, the Stavka, had no intention of letting the Wehrmacht catch its breath. On July 17, 1943, just one day after the German withdrawal order, the Red Army launched Operation Kutuzov in the north. Named after the hero of the 1812 war against Napoleon, the plan aimed to drive the Germans out of the Orel salient, a bulge in their lines that threatened Moscow. The offensive opened with a thunderous artillery barrage. Hundreds of guns and Katyusha rocket launchers saturated German defenses, while Soviet infantry and armor surged forward. In the first days, the Germans resisted fiercely. The Ninth Army, though depleted from the northern pincer of Citadel, fought a stubborn delaying action. Minefields, anti-tank guns, and counterattacks by panzer divisions slowed the Soviet advance. But the sheer weight of Soviet manpower and equipment, combined with growing shortages in German ranks, meant the outcome was inevitable. By August 5, the city of Orel had been liberated, and the northern threat to the Kursk front was eliminated. In the south, Operation Polkovodets-Rumiantsev began on August 3. This offensive targeted Belgorod and Kharkov, 2 key cities in the German defensive network. The attack was spearheaded by the 5th Guards Tank Army, Rotmistrov's formation, still recovering from Prokhorovka but now reinforced with new T-34s fresh from the factories east of the Urals. Soviet infantry, artillery, and air support worked in coordinated waves, wearing down German defenses day by day. Belgorod fell on August 5, and Kharkov, defended by some of the Wehrmacht's best remaining panzer formations, held out until August 23, when Soviet troops finally stormed the city. This victory was decisive. Kharkov had been a key German stronghold since 1941, changing hands multiple times during the war. Its loss marked the end of Germany's last large-scale offensive on the Eastern Front. The summer battles had cost the Soviets dearly, over 250,000 casualties, but for the Wehrmacht, the blow was catastrophic. Citadel had consumed irreplaceable reserves. The German army could no longer mount an offensive of similar scale in the east. Its elite panzer divisions, once the spearhead of Blitzkrieg, were now committed to defensive operations for the rest of the war. Beyond the battlefield, the psychological shift was just as significant. Soviet commanders had proven that the Red Army could not only withstand the best the Germans could offer but also respond with overwhelming counterblows. For German soldiers, the sense of inevitable victory was gone. For the Soviets, the road to Berlin, still long and blood-soaked, was now open in their minds. By the end of August 1943, the front lines had shifted decisively westward. The Battle of Kursk had not been a single clash, but a campaign of attrition and maneuver that ended with the Red Army firmly in control of the strategic initiative. From this point on, the Germans would retreat, and the Soviets would advance, until the war's final act in 1945.